This has been a summer of the migrant crisis in Europe. In the first 7 months of this year alone, 340,000 migrants have tried to enter Europe. That's about double the number of migrants this time last year. 2,500 people have died at sea trying to make their way to Germany, Hungary, Belgium, Austria, and Scandinavia. Last Thursday, a boat carrying some 500 migrants sank off the coast of Libya. Some 200 are missing and feared dead. On that same day, a grisly discovery in an abandoned truck in Austria. 71 bodies believed to be from Syria were discovered, including 4 children under the age of 10. It's taking a tremendous human toll, and the EU has now called for an emergency meeting in about 2 weeks. Bill Freilich is the director of Human Rights Watch's refugee program. Bill, thanks so much for talking with us. This isn't a new problem, but it seems it's gotten much, much worse this year. What's going on?
Well, of course, you have the conflict in Syria, which is really creating a huge push. We also have failed states that are continuing to produce large numbers of refugees, Afghanistan and Somalia in particular. If you take 4 countries, Syria, Afghanistan, Somalia, and Eritrea, another highly repressive regime, they represent 2/3 of the refugees and migrants that are coming into Europe this year. That's an enormous number, and it shows that the character of this is not just one of economic migration, but people that are fleeing conflict.
And we mentioned the countries they're fleeing to. Why those countries in particular?
Well, it's interesting. The European Union set up a system called the Dublin system, which basically said that the place where you first set foot is going to be responsible for processing your asylum claim, receiving you, ultimately integrating you. But as you could see from the outset, that was an unfair system because it essentially meant that the entire load would be held by Greece, Bulgaria, Malta, other countries that are relatively poor and have less capacity to actually process these claims and integrate people than Scandinavia, than Germany, than these other places.
So they're basically stopping off in Italy and Greece and countries like that and then making their way north?
Yeah, I mean, what really has happened is many of the countries on the outer frontier of the European Union have really proven incapable both of receiving people and holding them in a decent way, but also their asylum processes have been dysfunctional in many cases, and the approval rates have been completely at variance with those countries that are in the interior of the European Union. On paper, there's supposed to be no difference between Bulgaria, Hungary, and Sweden and Germany. They should have the same standards, the same procedures, the same reception conditions. But the reality is completely different from that.
And who are the people who are doing the smuggling?
Well, that's, again, a variety of people that are involved in that. There are those that are smugglers, which means that people pay them voluntarily because there's just really no other way legally to enter the European Union to lodge an asylum claim, if that's your intent. So you have very little choice but to go into the hands of a smuggler. There are also what are called traffickers, and these are people who are really exploiting people, forcing them at times, putting them into sexual slavery and this sort of thing. So there are all kinds of actors that are involved in this, some of whom are really preying upon this very vulnerable population, others that are actually helping to get them through a bad situation that has not created orderly, safe, and legal mechanisms for admitting people that have refugee claims.
Some countries, as you know, are building walls. What kind of impact is that having?
Well, of course, walls are completely indiscriminate. So whether you have a claim of fearing persecution and fleeing conflict, or whether you are motivated for economic reasons, a wall doesn't distinguish between those things. And so you really want to have a system where you decide and you understand some people do have a need for international protection, and they ought to be protected, and other people don't have such a claim, and they can be deported, and they can be returned to their home countries without doing them any harm.
Isn't that very hard to determine? I mean, you're talking about the difference between migrants and refugees, right? And how do you make that determination that someone, I mean, objectively, how do you really try to figure that out?
Well, there are standards and there are procedures for doing that. And as I mentioned, the European Union has actually agreed on what those standards and what those procedures are. They follow from international law the refugee definition in international law, and the European Union has adopted that definition, and they have procedures for going about and deciding that. There are 800,000 claimants that are projected this year in Germany, and Chancellor Merkel has said, yes, we're going to handle that. We'll bring in additional civil servants. We'll sort it out. We will share the responsibility among our states and municipalities, and we'll take care of it. And the other European member states really need to do the same, and they need to share this burden, and they need to approach it in a rational way.
Do you think they will?
Well, remains to be seen. They've had a few emergency meetings along the way, and they really have not come to terms with this problem in any realistic way. And it really has been each country for itself in many respects. And we've seen more of building of walls and deploying more troops to borders, which is really not the solution to the problem.
So what do you hope will come out of this EU emergency meeting that has been scheduled for September 14th?
Well, I think they have to really come to terms with the reality that they're faced with here, that in the last time that they met in emergency session, they were supposed to have agreed to relocate 40,000 asylum seekers from Italy and Greece among the 28 member states to process their claims over a 2-year period. They couldn't even agree to that 40,000. They came up with 32,500, well short of the mark. That same month, July, 50,000 new arrivals came into Greece alone. So the disconnect between Brussels and what's happening on the periphery of the European Union is enormous, and they have yet to come to terms with it. What they really need to do 2 weeks hence is to say, we have a serious problem on our hands, but it is a manageable problem. If we get together, we have a coordinated response, and we approach this in a rational way. So far, they haven't done that.
A number of European nations like Slovakia, Bulgaria, and Poland are favoring Christians over Muslims. How big a concern is this?
Hopefully this is a very marginal concern and clearly not one that has any basis in assessing people's vulnerability and treating them as human beings, plain and simple, with human rights. To make a distinction based on religion is really completely inappropriate under these circumstances.
Bill Freilich, Director of Human Rights Watch, its refugee program. Thanks so much for talking with us, Bill.
My pleasure, Katie.
We also always look forward to hearing what you have to say as well, so use hashtag Yahoo Live and let us know what you think about the latest on the migrant crisis. I'm Katie Couric. Thanks for watching.